Hey guys, it's Jessica from Studio Quirk. Today we're going to make a pair of pajama pants. First we need to pick a pattern. I'm using McCall's 8056. I'm going to identify my size by comparing my measurements. I'm a 16. Now I check out my pattern, identify the view, and cross-reference to find out how much fabric I need to buy. Okay, let's open our pattern envelope and separate the instructions from the tissue. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to look at all the pattern pieces available and I'm going to circle which ones I need to cut out. And then just to make it extra clear, I write down those numbers. Okay, now we're going to open up our tissue and pick out those pieces we just wrote down. See how I'm cutting a little outside of my pattern pieces? This is going to give me a much more accurate cut later on. Now press your tissue paper pattern to get out any little wrinkles. While your iron's hot, now's the time to also press your pre-wash fabric. Your pattern instructions will give you a cutting layout, which will match the yardage listed on the back of the envelope. We'll be cutting our pattern pieces two at a time by folding our fabric in half with the selvage edges matching. Want to make sure everything is nice and smooth and on grain. Now it's time to pin our tissue paper to our fabric. I want to make sure it's super straight, so I measure the distance from the marked grain line to the edge of the fabric. From there, I smooth out my pattern and pin diagonally into the corners and perpendicularly along the seam line. Now that you're set up to cut, you want to make sure and identify which line matches your size. Some will be dotted, some will be dashed, and some will be straight. I like to move my fabric and pattern around while I'm cutting instead of contorting my hands into weird positions. This is going to give me the straightest possible line. Don't forget to carefully clip in about a 1/4 inch for all of your notches. Lastly, you want to transfer over any markings. I like this tracing paper and I use it with a little perforated roller. Step 1 of our instructions tells us to cut two 1.5 inch squares. These are just backing for our buttonholes, so they don't need to be perfect. Pin one square behind your buttonhole marking and baste around the edge. Switch to your buttonhole foot and adjust it so that the finished buttonhole is 1 inch long. Now I'm going to use my needle to pull those threads to the wrong side of the fabric and trim up around that buttonhole. First, we're going to sew the inseam of our pants. I'm doing a French seam, which means I'm putting my fabric wrong sides together, matching the notches. For a refresher on French seams, I have a video linked below. For the crotch seam, I'm going to place my fabric right sides together and stitch 5/8 inch from the edge. Now stitch a second line, a 1/4 inch from the first seam line. Now very, very carefully, trim up next to that second seam line. To give it an extra secure finish, I'm going to switch out to my overlock foot and do a zigzag along that inner crotch line. Using a French seam like before, I'm going to stitch both of my side seams. It's time to make the waistband casing. I do this by pressing down a 1/4 inch and then pressing down another inch for my waistband. Press and pin into place. Stitch your waistband casing by sewing 3/4 of an inch from the waistband edge. Instead of combining the drawstring and the waistband like the pattern recommends, I'm doing my own of each, and I'm using a drawstring made out of twill tape instead of self fabric. Now you want to anchor these down to the front of your pajama pants before we push them through the casing. Using a safety pin, travel the entire length of your waistband. When you exit out the other side, pin together your drawstring. You want to take your elastic and cross that center front line, exit out the original entry point, and then we're going to sew our elastic together. This way your elastic is completely hidden. Evenly space out your gathers and tie a bow with your drawstring. Now it's time to make our cuffs. I'm using a piece of bias tape that's folded in half as a little break between the hem and the bottom of the pant leg, and then I'm pinning it all the way around. When you get to the end of your bias tape, you'll wrap that folded back part from where you started around the end, thus concealing all raw edges. Now let's lay out all of our cuff pieces in preparation for sewing. You're going to have 4 of each. 2 are going to be the facings and 2 will be the sides that are on the front. I have all my backs laid out here, and then I'm going to take all of my front pieces here and I'm going to lay them on top with the right sides together. Now stitch both sides of the cuffs and the cuff facings. Next, we'll attach the cuff to the hem of the pants. Matching notches and side seams. Before we attach our cuff facings, let's grade that last seam. You always want the layer that's closest to the body to be the shortest, so let's trim that off. Press under the top edge of your cuff facing to 5/8 inch under, and then you're going to attach it just the way you did the front cuff. To wrap this up, we're going to fold our cuff facing up into the inside of the garment, and then we're going to slip stitch along that seam line. A slip stitch is taking a bite into the bottom fabric, then going through the fold of the top, back down and taking another bite, and continuing this way around the entirety of the cuff. You guys, can you believe it? You've just made a pair of your own pajama pants, or maybe you want to make these as a gift. If you've liked this video, I would love for your comments below, or leave me questions if you have them. Please subscribe, and if you want to follow my day-to-day projects, check me out on Instagram at Jessica J. Quirk.